I'm going to play. I'm trying to debate whether to play the first chapter again or go into chapter 2. This is a book by Larry Rosenberg that I've read several times. It's probably my third time reading it. It's a discourse on the Anapanasati Sutra, a sutra about the conscious awareness of breath as a spiritual practice, and I consider it uh, a branch of a yogic practice called pranayama. Pranayama. I always get those words messed up. Which is pranayama, pranayama, which is awareness of breathing, yogic breathing. Let me see. Look up the word pranayama. Since nobody's here right now, pranayama, pranayama, pranayama. Uh, which is a Sanskrit word describing yogic breathing exercises that have the ability to quickly increase your energy, release stress, improve our mental clarity, and improve our physical health. Most recently, the term breathwork is being used in the Western world to describe these breathing exercises or pranayama. And the word pranayama is a Sanskrit word, is a Sanskrit compound. It's defined by various authors. Etymology of the word prana means breath. Okay. Plus, ayama defines it as the suspension of breath. So it sounds like the word refers to the process of breathing and not breathing. But the book is by Larry Rosenberg, and it's called Breath by Breath. It's a very, very good book. It's helped me through some very difficult times in my life with the insight that it's given me. Um, I think, honestly, a book like this, I think we need to go back probably to chapter 1. It's only 7 minutes. So let's do that. Chapter 1, here we go. Chapter 3, chapter 2. Bear with me here, because the cloud players get kind of wonky. Mhm. That is the book, though, right there. Breath by Breath. The Liberating Practice of Insight Meditation by Larry Rosenberg with David Guy at Shambhala Classics. So you can order the book if you're one who's disposed to reading yourself, which oftentimes is a little bit better when you have technological difficulties, like I'm doing right now. Let me see, buffering. Here we go. I think chapter 1 is the foundation of this practice, and I think I'd be doing a disservice to jump you guys into chapter 2. That's what I had to go through last time. Do 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 do. Gotta love technology. It's gonna save the world, right? Or not. Hope all you guys having a good Tuesday. I've had quite the journey myself the past couple of months, recovering. Get back to it. I get back to it in a couple of days. Actually, it'll be interesting. This is the longest period of time I've been off work in my entire life, outside of just graduating from college and looking for a job and all that. Okay, here we go. Pick up where you left off. The problem with this audio player is you can't click on the chapters you want to read. It shows you the chapters, but it won't let you play the chapters. Interesting. Might be listening to chapter 2 whether I want you to or not. Let me try this. Chapter 2. Chapter 1, yeah. There we go.
This is Audible. Audible Studios presents Breath by Breath, the liberating practice of insight meditation. Written by Larry Rosenberg, with David Guy. Foreword by John Kabat-Zinn. Narrated by Eduardo Ballerini. Foreword. This book is the product of an ongoing spiritual odyssey on the part of the author that I have had the privilege to observe, and from time to time share in over the more than 30 years that he and I have been what we fondly refer to as Dharma brothers. It is a journey of exploration that has never deviated, even in the most difficult and painful of times, from the target that Larry Rosenberg set for himself early on: the deepest personal encounter with the heart of wisdom practice, whatever the source, the deepest drinking in of what such practices had to offer, and the uncompromising embodiment of that understanding in the domain of ordinary living in the secular world. Now, in this touching and poignant book, he speaks with authority, passion, and his own inimitable brand of Brooklyn Jewish humor on the practice of meditation at its most basic and its most exquisite. Larry has chosen to structure his teachings here based on the Anapanasati Sutra, a text that has been commented upon time and time again throughout history in Buddhist circles, much as the Torah has occasioned generations of commentary and insight in the Jewish tradition. This text constitutes the basic meditative instructions of the Buddha, and so serves as a fundamental vehicle for gaining insight into the core teachings of Buddhism. As with all great classical texts, each teacher's interpretation, whether primarily scholarly or practical, is colored by his or her unique perspective and voice. Each individual who tackles the task tends to bring out different facets of the basic message. In recent years, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, Mindfulness with Breathing, and Thich Nhat Hanh, Breathe, You Are Alive, have contributed important interpretations of this sutra. Now Larry, who has studied with both of these teachers, as he himself explains, brings his own remarkable gifts to the task of using the teachings of the Anapanasati Sutra to make the practice of insight meditation come alive for the reader practitioner. Breath by Breath is more than one more in a long line of venerable and valuable commentaries on this text. Larry's treatment illuminates the sutra's essence and its practical utility in a wholly contemporary Western idiom, making it tangible, compelling, and immediately relevant for anybody who is seriously interested in developing a personal meditation practice. Here, the 4x4-fold framework of the sutra itself serves as a loom on which the author skillfully weaves, in front of the reader's very eyes, the tapestry of mindfulness meditation practice in all its simplicity, fullness, and depth. When the tapestry is complete, the loom of the sutra has fulfilled its purpose. What we are left with is an understanding of the practice in its exquisite simplicity,
Welcome,
its precisely
first
defined
listener.
detail,
Namaste.
and its transformative power, as well as a way to keep it vital and fresh through our own growing passion and appreciation for the path of inquiry it invites us to explore. The ability to evoke an impact of such magnitude, whether in speech or in writing, is a sign of a great teacher. The depth of Larry's understanding is apparent in his approach to the breath as a complete vehicle for the cultivation of mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom. His clarity is complemented by his commitment to keep things simple and demystified, and by his easygoing and delightful sense of humor. All shine through on virtually every page of this book. Larry is not kidding around, simple and humorous as this book may appear to be in places. The cultivation of mindfulness is ultimately a matter of life and death, not in a scary way, but in the sense that we are always at risk, in every moment, for missing what is deepest and richest in our lives, the texture of the tapestry itself. We might say, every pun intended, that the richness lies right beneath our noses in any and every moment. This book is an invitation to recognize that richness through our own daily inner work on ourselves, culminating in an uncompromising and accurate intimacy with our minds, our bodies, and our breathing, guided by the sutra, a precious intimacy that can serve as a door to awakening and freedom. Meditation is a lifetime's work. It usually deepens as we arrive incrementally at degrees of understanding. We often think we understand some aspect of practice or life. Then after more practice, it is not uncommon to find our understanding to be more encompassing and deeper, or perhaps totally different from what it was before. The Sutra on the Full Awareness of Breathing, reflecting the meditation practice itself, is truly limitless in its implications and importance. For this reason, Breath by Breath merits reading over and over again in its entirety, as well as dipping into here and there frequently, as both a reminder and a guide to practice. It is commonly said that the ancient peoples of the North have many words to describe the subtleties of what we refer to merely as snow, and that those of the forest have hundreds of words for shades of green. Anybody who meditates knows that the same might be said of the breath. Each breath moment is its own universe. In meditation, we come to know something about this terrain in ways that open doors, that bring us back to our senses, that refine our hearts, that help us understand what it means to be human, what it means to be whole, right here, right now. No two breaths are the same. No two moments are the same. Each one is our life. Each one is infinitely deep and complete in itself. The challenge here is to embody and live this awareness, to work with the automatic habits of mind that would turn us into automatons and betray our genius, to walk our own path, as Larry is continually encouraging the reader to do, to find our own way, breath by breath, to taste silence and discover liberation within each and any breath. This book will be of great utility, reassurance, and inspiration for all those wishing to embark on or resurrect a formal path of meditation practice, or for those who wish to refine and deepen their practice, or to hear once again, in its timeless beauty and its particular unique incarnation here through the voice of a seasoned and wonderful teacher, a Dharma lion in a lineage of wonderful teachers and Dharma lions, each unique going back to the Buddha, the universal wisdom of the Dharma. Jon Kabat-Zinn, August 1997. Introduction. Finding My Way. Every student's practice is peculiarly his or her own, and comes together in its own way. My practice has unfolded over many years, and it focuses on a particular discourse of the Buddha. But it was some time before I saw the real value of this teaching. My first teachers were from India, J. Krishnamurti and Vimala Thakur. They were non-sectarian and placed a strong emphasis on maintaining awareness at all times. By the early 1970s, I had studied meditation for a number of years, including 4 years with Vedanta master Swami Chinmayanda. I had worked with the Korean Zen master Seong San for 5 years, and had lived in that country for a year. More recently, I'd studied Soto Zen with the Japanese master Katagiri Roshi. Gradually, I came to see that the Theravada tradition of Vipassana meditation was a better match for me. All of these practices are closely related, of course, and can enrich one another. I was practicing at one of this country's prominent centers of Vipassana meditation, the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, when I encountered a monk named Bhikkhu Vimalu, a German national who had studied for 20 years in Burma, Thailand, and India. At that point, my practice was samatha vipassana. I focused on the breathing in order to calm the mind, then, dropping the breath as an object, opened the attention to a wider focus, noticing the arising and passing away of whatever aspect of body or mind presented itself most vividly. Bhikkhu Vimalu argued that I was seriously limiting my work with the breath, that in fact the breath could take me all the way to the deepest realizations. He told me of a particular sutra of the Buddha's, the Anapanasati Sutra, which outlined how the awareness of breathing could be used systematically to embrace both samatha and vipassana. I was impressed by what Bhikkhu Vimalu told me, and eventually led some retreats with him. But it would be years before I was fully convinced of the importance of breath awareness teaching as a complete practice. My conversion came during an intense 2-hour meeting with the great Thai teacher Ajahn Buddhadasa, an encounter that had a profound impact on my practice and changed my teaching forever. Buddhadasa was nearly 80 when I saw him, and not particularly well, but tireless in his teaching. He often taught informally, sitting in front of his hut in the forest with students and wild chickens and a dog gathered around him. He was convinced that the Anapanasati Sutra was a key document for practice and an ideal vehicle for teaching. He took me through the entire sutra step by step, in a detailed and painstaking way, part lecture, part meditation instruction. By the time he had finished, I was exhausted and soaking wet. It was one of the most powerful periods of learning I've ever experienced. To summarize very briefly, the Anapanasati Sutra is composed of 16 contemplations, which divide rather neatly into 4 sets of 4. The first 4 contemplations concern the awareness of breathing as it manifests in the body. The next 4 focus on feelings, not what we mean by that word in our culture, but everything that we perceive by means of our sense organs. The third set of 4 focuses on the mind, the mental formations and emotions that we concoct when we add ideas to our feelings. And the last 4 move on to pure vipassana, seeing into the lawfulness underlying all phenomena. Basic to all of these contemplations is the breath, which is used in them as an anchor, a reminder to keep the practitioner in the present moment. Buddhadasa's approach was rational and systematic, but also beautifully timed to open me up emotionally. He knew something of my history, and I had told him of my particular interest in the Zen concept of emptiness. When we got to the 13th contemplation, which concerns impermanence, and where real vipassana begins, he said that Anapanasati was one of the simplest and most effective means for realizing emptiness. We could move from the vantage point of the 13th back through the 12 previous contemplations and see impermanence and emptiness in all of them. I remember in particular the moment when we focused on the first contemplation, on the breath itself. I was sitting and listening meditatively as he instructed me. "There is no question," he said, "that breathing is taking place. Can you see that there is no breather to be found anywhere? The body is empty, the breath is empty, and you are empty." He meant that all these phenomena are empty of self or anything belonging to the self. They are impermanent. They arise by given conditions, and when those conditions change, they pass away. The concept of impermanence in this contemplation actually encompasses the other laws of wisdom, that all phenomena are unsatisfactory and lack an abiding self. The simple vehicle of the breath takes the practitioner from calming the mind all the way to the deepest wisdom, to nirvana. To say so much, of course, is to get way ahead of my story, but it is necessary to give some idea of what happened to me on that day. It wasn't just what Ajahn Buddhadasa said, but also the way he said it, his insistence and his conviction. He let me see that because the breath is so unassuming, I'd been undervaluing it. I was looking for a complicated path to enlightenment, when this simple one was right before me. He argued that the breath was an ideal vehicle for teaching Buddhism in the West. It didn't carry the cultural baggage that mantras, koans, and other methods do. He also argued that this sutra was directly related to the Satipatthana Sutra, considered in the Theravada tradition to be the core of the Buddha's meditation teaching. The Anapanasati Sutra covers the same material in a more streamlined way, he said, and examines it with the help of conscious breathing. I left Thailand on that occasion with a new and clearer focus to my practice. That was one of those moments in my life when many things came together. For years, I had been a natural foods enthusiast and had practiced and was still practicing yoga, an ancient discipline that gives great attention to the breathing. I began to see that one thing that had always attracted me about the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh was his recognition of the special nature of breathing. Time that I later spent with him on 3 long retreats was equally important in helping me grasp the full implications of the Buddha's teaching on breath awareness. Thich Nhat Hanh's lineage draws on both Theravada and Mahayana teachings, and he is quietly and gently on fire with enthusiasm for this practice. He, more than anyone else, demonstrates the importance of bringing breath awareness into daily life, of staying awake in the midst of all of our activities. He is unrelenting in his teaching, and it took such a strong message to get through to me. This intense focus on the breathing connected with Soto Zen, with the work I had done with Katagiri Roshi, and through him Suzuki Roshi, author of the seminal text, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Soto Zen emphasizes full attention to breathing and posture. All the wisdom one needs will be a natural outcome of such complete presence. The Anapanasati Sutra, though it can be used as a systematic course of contemplations, is also a blueprint of the way in which that wisdom can arise. I have always been interested in Dharma study. I believe that put in proper perspective, study and practice become one, and have always loved the classic texts of Buddhism. It gives me great satisfaction to teach from a sutra that is more than 2,500 years old, as vital and alive and important as when it was originally spoken. For nearly 10 years, it has been the basis of my personal practice and my teaching, and it has proven inexhaustible as a means to examine the message of the Buddha. But I need to say a few things about the text before we begin. Seen in one way, it is a program to follow, one that takes the meditator from the observation of a simple process in the body, the in and out breathing, all the way to full awakening and realization. That is the way some teachers use it, most notably, in my experience, Ajahn Buddhadasa. But it is also true that much of what the sutra describes will turn up naturally if you just sit and follow the breathing. If you persist in that practice over the course of days and months and years, it is natural for your attention to deepen until it includes the whole body, and for that process gradually to calm the body. Once your attention is in the body, you begin to notice feelings and your mental reactions to them, which leads you into the mind as a vast realm to explore. Finally, if you're paying attention, you can't help noticing that all the phenomena you're observing arise and pass away, that they are impermanent and lack an essential core. The 16 contemplations, then, represent a natural process. They might not unfold in exactly that order, and some of them might stand out more than others. But most of these aspects of body and mind eventually and quite naturally show up if you sit and look into yourself over a period of time. That isn't the same thing as training in each contemplation, where you persistently come back to the object of the contemplation and confine your attention to it no matter what else is going on. So you can use the sutra as a training program or as the description of a process. But however you use it, you can't force these steps. They will happen in their own time. You can't bring them about. You can prepare the ground, certainly, and make a sincere effort. But ultimately, your body and mind do what they want, and you won't have much say about it. However you decide to use the sutra, it is best to know the whole thing from the start, to read the entire commentary as you begin or continue your practice. I introduce sitting and walking meditation early on, so that you will have those practices to follow as you read. It isn't necessary to read the whole book before you begin to practice. You also don't need to have mastered one contemplation before you read about the next. I would suggest that very early on, right after you've read the meditation instructions perhaps, you read chapter 6, on bringing the practice into daily life. You might profitably read that chapter several times in the course of reading the book. When I teach at our center in Cambridge, I emphasize daily life right from the start. It is very important to understand that you're being introduced not to an esoteric practice that is divorced from the rest of your life, but to a new way of living, in which attention to every moment is paramount. In that way, it is fine to skip ahead in the book. It is fine to read chapter 6 any time. The first 4 chapters deal with the 16 contemplations of the sutra itself, which divide themselves, as I've said, into 4 sets of 4. Chapter 5 describes a condensed method of practice, reducing the 16 steps to 2. You may well decide to practice that way, but even if you do, it will be a great help to read about all 16 first. Chapter 6, as I said, discusses bringing the practice into daily life, and Chapter 7 is a brief introduction to the subject of silence, which is where the whole practice is headed, but also where it all begins. That, too, is a chapter that you can read any time in the course of the book, though there is a certain logic to having it at the end. Through the centuries, Buddhism has traveled to different countries and taken on the hues of various cultures. In America, where it has arrived primarily in recent years, it will influence and be influenced by our culture. But we have a unique opportunity, because all of the Buddhist traditions are present here, and we can learn from all of them. People attach to different forms and draw sectarian lines, but in the end, the various traditions aren't essentially different. I teach Vipassana meditation in the Theravada tradition, but I believe the Anapanasati Sutra is valuable even for those who practice in other traditions. This sutra is a teaching of the Buddha, after all, and was meant for all his disciples. Vipassana meditators can use it as a training manual or as a reference text. Zen practitioners, who are given much less detailed guidance in their meditation instructions, can read it as an outline of what may happen in their practice. Those who meditate in the Tibetan tradition can use it in that way too. The Anapanasati Sutra is helpful for anyone who is attracted to the breath as an object of awareness. Like many ancient texts, the sutra includes repetition and obscure and difficult passages. It is actually a whole study in itself. Since this book is intended as a manual for practice, not a scholarly commentary, I include at this point only the small section that highlights the teachings I will offer. The full text is in the appendix, and I will refer to parts of it in the teaching that follows. In any case, let us read the words of the Buddha. Anapanasati Sutra. The meditator, having gone to the forest, to the shade of a tree, or to an empty building, sits down with legs folded crosswise, body held erect, and sets mindfulness to the fore. Always mindful, the meditator breathes in. Mindful, the meditator breathes out. The 16 Contemplations. First tetrad, body group. 1. While breathing in long, one knows, I breathe in long. While breathing out long, one knows, I breathe out long. 2. While breathing in short, one knows, I breathe in short. While breathing out short, one knows, I breathe out short. 3. One trains oneself. Sensitive to the whole body, I breathe in. Sensitive to the whole body, I breathe out. 4. One trains oneself. Calming the whole body, I breathe in. Calming the whole body, I breathe out. Second tetrad, feelings group. 5. One trains oneself. Sensitive to rapture, I breathe in. Sensitive to rapture, I breathe out. 6. One trains oneself. Sensitive to pleasure, I breathe in. Sensitive to pleasure, I breathe out. 7. One trains oneself. Sensitive to mental processes, I breathe in. Sensitive to mental processes, I breathe out. 8. One trains oneself. Calming mental processes, I breathe in. Calming mental processes, I breathe out. Third tetrad, mind group. 9. One trains oneself. Sensitive to the mind, I breathe in. Sensitive to the mind, I breathe out. 10. One trains oneself. Gladdening the mind, I breathe in. Gladdening the mind, I breathe out. 11. One trains oneself. Steadying the mind, I breathe in. Steadying the mind, I breathe out. 12. One trains oneself. Liberating the mind, I breathe in. Liberating the mind, I breathe out. Fourth tetrad, wisdom group. 13. One trains oneself. Focusing on impermanence, I breathe in. Focusing on impermanence, I breathe out. 14. One trains oneself. Focusing on fading away, I breathe in. Focusing on fading away, I breathe out. 15. One trains oneself. Focusing on cessation, I breathe in. Focusing on cessation, I breathe out. 16. One trains oneself. Focusing on relinquishment, I breathe in. Focusing on relinquishment, I breathe out. Chapter 1. Breathing with the Body. Witness to the Teachings. The Anapanasati Sutra begins with the words, familiar to anyone who has studied the original teachings of the Buddha, I have heard, often translated, thus I have heard. Ananda is speaking, the Buddha's cousin and one of his closest disciples. He is using this phrase to depersonalize the teachings. It is not I who is speaking, but also to legitimize and give them authority. This is from the Buddha. For the first 20 years of his teaching, the Buddha used various attendants, but he decided finally to settle on just one. His followers were human beings, not saints, so there was a certain amount of competition and jockeying for position. Ananda didn't enter into that, so the Buddha chose him. Ananda set some interesting conditions. He knew that the Buddha would be well received wherever he went, going into the best homes, being offered the best food and robes, and worried that such temptations would endanger his practice. So he asked to be left out of all that. He also made it a condition that if he ever felt any confusion about a Dharma talk, the Buddha would continue to answer his questions until he was sure he knew what was meant. If he ever missed a talk, the Buddha would repeat it for him. Like many of the ancients, this was the period of the oral tradition. Ananda had a colossal memory. 3 months after the Buddha died, there was a meeting of enlightened meditators to put together the essence of his teachings, and Ananda was central because he had heard and understood everything. All of the meditators had to agree to a sutra before it was admitted to the teachings. The words, "Thus have I heard," became a seal of approval. Bhikkhus is the word that the Buddha used to address his listeners, and though that word is normally translated monks, the teachings were actually meant for lay people as well. This term addresses itself to all serious practitioners. At the practice periods where his talks were given, senior monks instructed newer ones in groups of 10, 20, 30, or 40. A community, or sangha, had formed. A group of humans trying to deal, as we all do, with the fact that our minds produce suffering. An ideal sangha, as this one certainly was, includes members with some degree of awakening. It is common even nowadays for Dharma centers to schedule 3-month retreats. That tradition harkens back to the rainy season in India, which lasted roughly 3 months. Because of the steady rains, the farmers were working hard and travelers couldn't go anywhere. It was a good time for intensive practice. At the end of 3 months, there was a pavarana ceremony, which was a chance for monks to get instruction and to assess how they had done. The Buddha at this particular ceremony said that things were going so well, the practitioners were practicing so diligently, that he would stay an extra month. Word got out, and monks from all over the country came to practice with him. At the end of that month, on the full moon day, he gave another talk. He began by speaking of various degrees of attainment and of the different practices that monks were engaged in. At the end of that list, he mentioned the subject of the sutra and the basis for our whole practice. In this community of monks, there are monks who remain devoted to the mindfulness of in and out breathing. Any of the practices that the Buddha mentioned could have been the subject of endless explication. He was an extremely skillful teacher and used different methods depending on the group he was addressing. Basically, though, there is just one teaching, the Four Noble Truths, and all of the Buddha's other teachings fit within that framework. There is suffering, there is a cause for that suffering, there is an end to it, and there is a means to that end. He had often spoken before of working with the breathing But on this occasion, he put together all of the essential aspects of his teaching on this subject. He obviously believed this teaching to have great potential, giving rise ultimately to clear knowing and release. At the end of his introduction, the Buddha gives the simple instructions that form the basis for breath meditation. There's much more to say, of course, but also nothing more. If we could observe these instructions, the rest of the practice would follow. The meditator, having gone to the forest, to the shade of a tree, or to an empty building, sits down with legs folded crosswise, body held erect, and sets mindfulness to the fore. Always mindful, the meditator breathes in. Mindful, the meditator breathes out. When he mentions the forest or the shade of a tree, the Buddha means that we should remove ourselves from familiar settings, which we have generally set up as places of craving and attachment. In our case, a refrigerator full of food, a television, stereo, shelves of books. Most of us, of course, choose the empty building. That might be a place like a meditation center or a monastery, where people come for periods of intensive practice. It might also be a particular place in your house or apartment that you've set aside, one that is empty of your usual distractions. Having a place free of distractions is especially helpful for new meditators, like training wheels on a child's bike or water wings for a new swimmer. Though correct practice is to be mindful everywhere, to take our practice into every aspect of daily life, it is always helpful to have a safe and protected place designated for meditation. The Buddha mentions a cross-legged posture. That has been a traditional way to sit in the East, and for the purposes of meditation, with the weight resting like a stool on 3 points, 2 knees and the buttocks, it is ideal. Some people in the West accomplish the same thing with a kneeling posture, using a cushion or a bench, or sitting in a chair. The key factors are comfort and stability. This is the beginning of a process known as acquiring a seat, about which we will have more to say. The first step in that process is to find a stable sitting posture that is right for you. Some students wonder if cross-legged posture refers to the full lotus position, each foot resting on the opposite thigh, or the half lotus, 1 foot resting on the opposite thigh. Probably the Buddha did mean the full lotus, and there is no question that it is an extremely stable posture, perhaps the ideal one. I myself had a teacher who thought the full lotus extremely important, and who asked me to master it. It took me 10 years. The first year, I couldn't even get into it. The next, I could hold it for perhaps 5 minutes. He also felt that I was too bookish, so he allowed me to study every day for as long as I could hold the full lotus. That was a great way to cut down on my reading. Now the full lotus is quite comfortable for me, the most comfortable posture for sitting. But my own judgment is that it usually isn't worth a new student's trying so hard to learn it. Although if you can assume the full lotus when you begin, it is a good idea to sit that way and let the posture mature. If it sets up an unrealistic goal, it can become an occasion for suffering and a distraction from the real purpose of Dharma practice. It can too easily be in the service of the ego. Years after I had mastered the full lotus, another teacher walked by while I was sitting, tapped on my shoulder, and gestured toward my full lotus. That is the whole problem for you. And it can be a problem if it becomes something you attach to. The simple act of sitting in a stable, upright posture with calmness and dignity has an importance all its own. The complete absence of movement is as much an expressive act as dance or martial arts. If we can sit like a Buddha, perhaps we can discover our Buddha nature. Such dignity has nothing to do with self-image and is in no way an affectation. Picture a tree in a powerful storm, with high winds and heavy rain. The tree is blown back and forth by the wind, often looking as if it will blow over. But it doesn't, because it has deep roots. In our practice, the deep roots are a stable sitting posture. That's what acquiring a seat is all about. Developing composure and stability. And the storm can be a powerful emotion, like fear or loneliness or anger. We think of emotions as being in the mind, but the body and mind, though distinguishable, are interrelated, and the mind is also a crucial factor in developing a stable sitting posture. Once you have done that, you can be with whatever storm comes up. You can really experience your emotions, which is the key to becoming free from them. The sitting posture is not an incidental factor, but a vital part of the practice. Having a firm physical foundation to support the work of mindfulness can be crucial in helping our practice to mature. Of course, finally, and in a profound way, as we will see as we penetrate more deeply into the sutra, it is the mind that must sit in the full lotus. Students often ask whether the eyes should be open or closed. In the Theravada Vipassana tradition, we tend to sit with the eyes closed. Those in other traditions, Zen or Tibetan Buddhism, sit with the eyes open or half open. The advocates of the eyes closed school say that if your eyes are open, there are too many distractions. The eyes open school says that if your eyes are closed, fantasies arise, or you get sleepy. I have never found either of these things to be true. Most important is not to make a problem of it, or allow it to become a distraction. Find a way that is right for you, and practice that. Try to be straight and comfortable, relaxed and balanced. This isn't a mindless rigidity which locks itself at the base of the spine and doesn't give the posture another thought, but a relaxed, aware straightness, an uprightness that emerges from within. An erect posture makes the breathing easier, and ease of breathing relaxes the body. These two factors feed on each other. Once you have established a stable posture, the Buddha says, you should arouse mindfulness. Practice as intimacy. Mindfulness is a term that is used a great deal in the Anapanasati Sutra, and it would be helpful to understand it before we go on. We human beings have an extraordinary capacity, which we sometimes take for granted until it is called to our attention. Unlike other beings in the world who are living out their lives, we have the ability to be conscious of that process as we do so. Mindfulness is often likened to a mirror. It simply reflects what is there. It is not a process of thinking. It is preconceptual, before thought. One can be mindful of thought. There is all the difference in the world between thinking and knowing that thought is happening, as thoughts chase each other through the mind and the process is mirrored back to us. The only time that mindfulness can happen is in the present moment. If you are thinking of the past, that is memory. It is possible to be mindful of memory, of course, but such mindfulness can only happen in the present. Mindfulness is unbiased. It is not for or against anything, just like a mirror which does not judge what it reflects. Mindfulness has no goal other than the seeing itself. It doesn't try to add to what's happening or subtract from it, to improve it in any way. It isn't detached, like a person standing on a hill far away from an experience, observing it with binoculars. It is a form of participation. You are fully living out your life, but you are awake in the midst of it. And it is not limited to the meditation hall. It can be used on a simple process like the breathing, or on highly charged and unpleasant emotions like fear or loneliness. It can also follow us into the ordinary life situations that make up our day. Eventually, it becomes more a way of living than a technique. One word that I personally have come to associate with mindful living is intimacy. The great 13th century Japanese Zen teacher Dojin was once asked, "What is the awakened mind?" And he answered, "The mind that is intimate with all things." To take a simple example, you're walking in the woods and your attention is drawn to a beautiful tree or a flower. The usual human reaction is to set the mind working. What a beautiful tree. I wonder how long it's been here. I wonder how often people notice it. I really should write a poem. The way of mindfulness would be just to see the tree. As we will discuss later, you might focus on the breath for a few moments so that the thinking calms itself. Then as you gaze at the tree, there is nothing between you and it. There is no separation. You are at one with it. This is not, as people sometimes believe, to demean thinking. Thinking is a marvelous human activity. The Buddha's teachings themselves, among many other human marvels, would be impossible without it. But thinking often comes between us and our experience. Inasmuch as it does, we are not intimate with that moment. We are not mindful. Mindfulness does not just belong to inspiring moments in nature. We often, as we emphasize in retreats, practice with the most mundane tasks, taking out the garbage, cleaning the toilet. An example from my own life is that I have gradually become aware in recent years that I whistle as I wash the dishes. Not only that, but the songs I whistle tend to be old ones from the 1950s. What I gradually realized was that when I was a teenager, I shared the dishwashing with my sister. And whatever I might think now of simple housekeeping tasks, in those days I found them a pain. To get myself through the dishes, I would whistle. And here I am, still whistling the same tunes all these years later. The task of mindfulness is not to strong-arm yourself into some rigid attitude. I have failed in my practice. I will not whistle again for the remainder of my adult life. It is just to see that whistling, or singing, or thinking is separating you from your experience. Once I saw that, I could whistle again. The whistling was no longer a shield obstructing my raw contact with dishwashing. These were no longer two activities colliding with each other. The two things had become one. There's a centuries-old koan that I often use in my teaching. Koans come out of the Zen tradition and are questions that students meditate on to further their practice. In the old Zen monasteries, the temperature could be a major factor. People practiced year-round, and of course there was no central heating or air conditioning. So the question arose, how do you practice when you're extremely hot or extremely cold? Any number of answers were given through the years. Go to the place where there is no hot or cold. Where might that be? The student wonders, and the teacher answers enigmatically, hot Buddha, cold Buddha. A further amplification might be, hot kills, cold kills. Don't make hot, don't make cold. The teaching here concerns the same tendency we have already mentioned, to add concepts to our experience and make it other than it is. The fact is that there is a certain temperature. You're sitting with sweat pouring down your face, or with your teeth chattering. And that is the moment for you, those particular sensations. As soon as you add concepts to the discomfort, torment begins. What if I get dehydrated? What if I get heat prostration? Or what if I get frostbite, die of exposure? Why is it so cold when it's only September? Why didn't I stay home so I wouldn't have this problem at all? There are obviously certain extreme conditions that require some action, and a mindful person would be the first to notice them. But most of the time, we are within a normal range of temperatures, and the task of mindfulness is to be intimate with the experience, really to feel the sweat pouring down the face or the body shivering. When the Buddha is hot, he sweats. When cold, he shivers. Sometimes we have the mistaken idea that a truly enlightened being wouldn't be subject to such conditions. The Buddha wouldn't notice heat or cold. Actually, almost the opposite is true. He would be aware of them to an extraordinary degree. He would feel all of their subtle gradations, but he wouldn't make anything more out of them. They would be just what they are. The subject of intimacy often comes up in terms of relationship, of course, and has become a contemporary obsession. People are sometimes desperate to experience intimacy, but it is extremely difficult to be intimate with someone else until you've been intimate with yourself. And the same kind of thought processes interfere with relationships that interfere with everything else in our life. We build up images of ourselves and of the other, and in a typical interaction, the real people don't meet at all. Practice breaks through all that, breaks through these images to what is really happening in the moment. Real intimacy does not look for some particular experience, but sees things as they are. Finally, enlightenment is the experience of intimacy with the entire universe. There is no separation whatsoever. You totally disappear in the process of uniting with the raw content of the present moment. And because you do, you have never been more alive. A famous Tibetan master, Kalu Rinpoche, expressed this truth beautifully. We live in illusion and the appearance of things. There is a reality. We are that reality. When you understand this, you see that you are nothing. And being nothing, you are everything. That is all. The source of life. This quality of mindfulness, of just being with an experience.
I'm gonna stop right there because my how much time do I have left on this computer? 1%. My battery's about to go dead. So the book is Breath by Breath: The Liberating Practice of Insight Meditation by Larry Rosenberg. We listened to 44 minutes. We had the foreword, and then there was the actual reading of the sutra, which is 16 different lines going from the body to the objects of mind, as we call them, or thought processes, to the mind itself, which is the third set of four, and the last set of four I call the wisdom, or I actually call them the contemplations on liberation, because it deals with concepts that are associated with what I want to say is the empty nature of all phenomena, and how when you finally rise to that realization and you stop attaching to everything, you have a sense of freedom, mental clarity. And of course, this happens in at different levels. I think there's too much, especially being Western, there's too much jockeying for position. And this jockeying for position even happened in India because of the history of the caste, and how you have the Brahmin caste and the royal caste and all these different, and without knowing it, we do this constantly. Like, we need to add our mental commentary to every single thing. Everything that happens in the body has an overlord. You can call it the ego if you want, but this adding to every single thing gets in the way of us ever truly experiencing each moment for what it is, from truly getting to know ourselves. And make no mistake about it, this is a process of getting to know oneself. As it said over the ancient Greek temples, was it? Know thyself. So you could really boil everything we just talked about, we just heard, down to a process of how do I actually get to know myself? Because in getting to know myself as an extension of nature, of this universe, I become familiar with everything. Okay. And so then the wisdom is to understand that there is no need to always add to every situation my own little mental postscripts. And this is a process that we're taught through education, through interacting with other human beings, through not being taught how to properly deal with the emotions. Because if you go back to the Anapanasati Sutra, the second set of four is dealing with sensitive to rapture, I breathe in; sensitive to pleasure, I breathe in and out; aware of the, he says, thought processes, I breathe in and out; and liberating myself from thought processes, I breathe in and out. That's the second set of four. The first set of four is I breathe in long, I breathe out long; I breathe in short, I breathe out short; I breathe aware of the body, the entire body, I breathe in and I breathe out; and then calming the body, I breathe in, I breathe out. It's not really that we are or are not. See, this is the process when you see it, that this is what we're trying to short circuit. Just then, when you said we're not our thoughts, I think the masters would say yes and no. They wouldn't agree with you and say, no, we're not. And they wouldn't say, uh, no. They wouldn't say, no, we're not, or yes, we are. And I'm trying to bring a different way of thinking about reality into play. I'm trying to follow in the tradition of my teachers, of my gurus, which have been, multiple persons have been responsible for me being at my level of understanding. And what I saw happening was a learning, to look at reality in a different way, to just look, to just see what is. And I'm telling you, it's the process of seeing clearly. If it was that easy, we wouldn't have Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, and I could go on and on and on. There's so many religions in the world that I can't even begin to remember them all. And what we see in the teachings, when we boil down to it, is the student is trying to grasp truth. And when you look at the core of the teachings, especially the Anapanasati Sutra, it tries to cut through all of the mental discourse and the intellectualization that goes on and the grasping that goes on, because that is the source of suffering, you see, and give you a tool, a teaching, a tool that is a process that if you apply it to self for your entire life, because trust me, I've been practicing Anapanasati Sutra now for probably 20 years, 20 years of solid, like really trying to use it. And I think Rosenberg used it for a much longer period of time than that. And his background in the when I looked at the book was he had really been exposed to Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. He had studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, so he had studied with great teachers. The value of studying with great teachers is similar to this. If you listen to what I played at first, it was a foreword, and then it was Rosenberg's own words. You know, you can sense the clarity that comes into play when a great teacher illuminates a subject. And as he said in the book, the Buddha was a great teacher. Okay, so his ability to clarify and illuminate a subject was unequaled. Okay, was unequaled. And what happens with the rest of us is we look at a portion or a piece of something. And what I've seen with great teachers is they have an ability to clarify something without going too zooming too far into one aspect and without going too far out. What they do what's necessary in that situation. They bring, as he said in the book, they bring to bear what is necessary for this student, for this group, as the Buddha did, for this situation. Uh, yeah, I've seen Fight Club, um, but to really understand this, you have to become a student, not just of Buddhism, but of this particular teaching itself. Because what Rosenberg talks about, and this is what I see the tendency of in the West. The tendency in the West is to grasp. The tendency, if you're raised in the West and you speak English and you're raised in the 20th century, is to grasp or would this be 21st century? 21st century. No, I don't. It's been a long time since I've seen the movie, but I most definitely wouldn't let go of the wheel if I was driving the car, unless it was a Google car. The thing is this, man. This is the thing. Like, I talk to a lot of people that are very intelligent. I'm a doctor. I've been around people with high IQs my whole life. I've been around people that have the ability to, what I would say, the ability to dissect things very quickly, and they get to, let's say, 98, 99% accuracy as far as their ability to dissect a situation and clarify it. Now, I will say this: take it, contemplate it, and really think about what I'm about to say. The 1% that we don't get is everything. Okay, and that's difficult for people that are raised in the West to understand. It's difficult. It's difficult because it's like it's like, I don't know. It's like trying to explain being wet to somebody that's never been in a bathtub or been in the ocean. So you have to become a student. And the reason I say you have to become a student, yeah, it's been 20. It's probably been 30 years since I've seen that movie. Maybe not quite that long. Maybe 10, 15 years. But go back and replay the first part of this broadcast and listen to Rosenberg. Listen to a master teacher, because being a teacher is one thing, which I am, but a master teacher is what I hope one day strive, and not for myself. I hope to attain that ability for the benefit of others, because when you can quickly clarify and quickly get to the source of problems, then you have great benefit to others. You have what I call great skill. It's a difference in a surgeon that patches you up and you walk out of the hospital 2 days, and one that kind of has a lot of mistakes and people end up in the ICU a lot. Okay, this is the 1% that we can't perceive, as far as our ability to get to the bottom of what is the nature of being. What is the nature of being? What is the source of suffering? Because we can't quite grasp that 1%, then we end up being the surgeon that's has a butcher knife become the surgery. What's up, Doctor Butcher? Oh, I'm happy. Who's who's on the table today? We plunge the knife into reality. The knife being our gross perceptions and our emotions that we have not had insight or time or effort placed upon the processes of realizing what they really are and how they actually operate. And the sutra, if you look at it, it's sublime in that you will think you will go through this sutra really quickly because it's easy. It's only 16 lines. I think I memorized that sutra 20, 30 years ago. It took me like 5 minutes just to memorize it. It took me like 5 whole minutes or 10 whole minutes to memorize that sutra. 16 lines. It's taken me my entire life, okay, to come anywhere near the the realization of what it actually is saying and how sublime it is. Okay, so it's a great tool. It's a great tool. Are there other great tools? Yeah, sure. I'm sure there are. But being trained as I was in medicine, I am trained that to be of the utmost benefit. And the Buddha was and often is compared to a physician. He diagnosed the problem, suffering. He came up with a medicine or antidote for that suffering. Okay, which is, I would say, summarize it as the realization of truth. You know, and he taught us, is teaching us how to apply the antidote. Because just because I give you a medicine, it doesn't mean you know how to use it. If I give you aspirin and you stick them up your butt, they might work, or you might take a shit 2 minutes later and not get any benefit. Whereas if you put them in your mouth, swallow them, it will go through your whole alimentary tract, be absorbed. The acetylsalicylic acid will get, prostaglandin inhibitors, et cetera, et cetera. We'll get to the source of the problem, short circuit the chemical reactions and the physiological processes that are causing inflammation, yada yada yada. But that requires not just the tool. Okay, the sutra, the Anapanasati Sutra, is a tool. It is a medicine. The way to properly apply it takes time, because as I said, it's sublime. It's sublime, and I think when you listen to Rosenberg's commentary, he's trying to tell you that. And I've read this book, heard this book now 2 to 3 times now, and I'm going through it. This is my third time probably going through this book, and I understand now why he took so much time in the foreword to tell you his background. That he had been through. Look, most of us are not going to study with Thich Nhat Hanh. We're not going to study Theravada and Mahayana Buddhism under these, go to these retreats he's gone to, study with these great teachers that he studied with, you know, and he obviously has some of his karmically. I think we all come with our own set of skills. So he has the skill and the ability to grasp these teachings, but it's taken him a lifetime. I think I want to say when he wrote that book, he must have been. I don't know. I don't know if he was in his 40s or 50s, but he'd had some experience. And the insight that you need to apply these tools does not just come with academic learning, which, in my opinion, is trash for the most part. Because now what happens nowadays is disciplines that came from an ancient source and everything that came along with that, as far as how the student should be prepared and how and how he should learn, is not taught. We're not even taught in school how to properly learn. I don't remember one class, not one class in undergrad, high school, grade school, kindergarten, mom and dad at home. My dad kind of, sort of, but he was very strict. But, thank God for something. But that taught me how to use my mind properly. The simple discussion of the mind. What is the mind? I mean, since we're spending millions of dollars in education to train this, right? Am I not mistaken? Right? The system is corrupt, but it also has elements of non corruption within it. In other words, the teachers in the classroom do have the ability, if they have the insight, to bring to bear what is necessary for you to be the most efficient learner in life that you can be. I'm sitting here right now talking about a 2,500-year-old teaching. I'm not getting paid to do this, okay? I have no motivation to do this other than, one, my own insight as to the benefit it has been to me, and two, as a teacher, the understanding that without teaching people how to take the damn aspirin properly, they're going to stick it up their ass, stick it in their ear, push it up their nose, sit and talk about it. Let's get drunk and have a party and put the aspirin on a fucking pinata and swing at it. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with it, okay? But most likely, it will not be applied in the most skillful way that's necessary for humanity to finally quit chasing its own ass, and generate so much suffering and death for not just the elites. I mean, it's not just the elites doing it to us. We're all- we're active participants in this process, you know. And until people have the insights and the experience of what clarity of mind really looks like, well, how can you have clarity of mind when you don't know what the mind is? You have no experience with it. You've not really been taught how to learn. You haven't really been taught the importance of cleaning house. Never, never. Now, maybe if you take a psychology class, and maybe high schools teach them. Do high schools? I don't know. Do high schools teach psychology now? Like, I would think if they can teach AP biochemistry or AP calculus, they probably have high schools in the United States since I graduated in the '80s that teach psychology. I mean, that's the first step, is teaching people the history, and again, modern history. Okay, because again, what I'm sharing with you, with Rosenberg's book and with the sutra, is 2,500 years old. So it's a lot older than some modern psychology. Okay, modern psychology is sort of reinventing the wheel and adding to it modern findings, and it's necessary. Yes, it's necessary and it's useful, because aspirin requires a knowledge of horticulture, plants, trees, because it was willow tree bark originally. The Native Americans used it just fine without knowing any biochemistry. The Native Americans used aspirin just fine without knowing Buddhism. They used it just fine without knowing modern pharmacology and medicine. So to use something skillfully requires a certain type of insight and knowledge and wisdom that is not it's not just in one it's not just one culture's heritage to have this type of knowledge. You know, one of my frustrations is that the polarization that we see in America between, ethnic groups, the class structure we have, um the sexes, peoples from different backgrounds as far as socioeconomic. Okay, each person on each end of the polarity is not aware of the modifications that has taken place to their mental processes and their thought processes. So because they're not aware, and especially the people that are comfortable, they really don't have a strong motivation to dip into the processes unless they come born karmically with the desire to help, the desire to understand. And there are people like that. There are people that are born with immense wealth that come karmically with they have the need to know. They want to understand humanity they want to understand the nature of mind and the processes that lead to suffering and how to alleviate that suffering. We can't say that they don't exist, because we've all seen the philanthropic endeavors of many persons. But philanthropic endeavors in and of themselves don't get the job done. Okay, philanthropic endeavors by themselves, without the insight that goes behind them, are just empty gestures. I mean, if I got $120 billion, am I really phased by if I take 20 or 30 million and start a foundation? And my goal here is not to, sit here and vilify the elite classes, the upper socioeconomic classes is a better word for them. That's a waste of my time because they have to deal with the same barriers of mind that I do. And I actually find it fortuitous to be born into the middle class as a person from the African American community, because the pressures that have been placed upon me by self by society, I, I look at it as, how do you make diamonds? You make diamonds with pressure. And my response to these pressures and to these perceived sufferings in my life has led me down this path to go to teachers like Rosenberg, go to teachers that I can identify through my own understanding, obviously, that this teacher is teaching something that is a benefit. And you may come to many, many, many teachers before you come up on some profound, you know, insights that will help change your life. But most people, I'm going to say this because of my own experience. Most people, because we're all fat and happy or we're not, will not dig any deeper than is necessary to maintain their own well-being and their own sense of, you know, feeling good. We're the pleasure principle, as Janet Jackson put it. So you have to at some point grow up and get beyond the pleasure principle. And you could argue that, well, aren't you trying to attain bliss? Yeah, but bliss, to reduce that state of consciousness to just pleasure or hedonism, is short sighted. And there are whole communities historically that have come up with, this hedonistic approach towards, if I just can feel good no matter what, then I attain the same goal as a person that has liberated his or her consciousness from mental programming, from centuries of karmic, generational family. Because, epigenetics, we pass traits down through our experience, through the environment. How this really comes together and how it plays out, I think none of us have fully appreciated the interplay between mind and environment, because they really are one. Okay? They really are one. There's levels and extensions of the one that lead to the misunderstandings. And everyone is, we talked about this before. Periscope, I think we talked about the elephant, but yeah, we're all grasping at the elephant, blind men trying to figure out what we got a hold of. I got a trunk, I got a foot, I think it's a stool, I got a tail, I think it's a feather duster. And so the nature of reality uh, is that unless you can approach it with a certain amount of mental clarity and insight and pureness of perception, you will always, 100% of the time, come up with the conclusion, come up with a conclusion that in and of itself is not the thing. The Tao Te Ching talks about this, and teachers like the Buddha, with tools like this sutra, are trying to give you the most trimmed down, poignant, to the point, relevant, timeless teaching that they can, because they have identified the problem. Okay, they have diagnosed the disease, and they're trying to. You gotta understand, the Buddha came up in a time when I want to say the Brahmin class was prominent, which, if I'm not mistaken, came from Hinduism. There was this caste structure. The Buddha obviously was born into royal class, so he was born into the highest caste. But he identified, I think he saw within his society, the different strata, the separations. Every time I turn on the radio or the TV or go to the internet, I see some kind of discussion about human beings that is based on differences. Israel and Palestine, black folks and white folks, up versus down, two legs good, four legs bad, right? Thank God I was educated from a young age and got to read the book Animal Farm by Orwell, because social drama. It's a dilemma, because the ignorance of what we really need to be focusing on is passed down generation to generation, every caste, every socioeconomic group makes the same mistake. I read the book when I was in high school, Animal Farm. I don't know what documentary you're talking about, unless you're talking about a documentary called The Social Dilemma. But sometimes the problem is the very structures that we've created. Social dilemma, because when you look at this these teachings that we go through on here, really what they are is an attempt not just to add something to your repertoire, because in the West, I don't think we need shit added. Look, I can take you around this house. This the shit in this house, if I took it to some village in some place far off, I don't know, it would either be worthless because they would say, we don't need this. We need fishing hooks and or it would take it and say, oh, I could sell this and make some money on it. You know. So my point is, what's perceived as value, it depends on the person and the group and the part of the world they're from. And so you're never going to get human beings who are mired in relative reality and only see reality from a sense of things having a certain monetary value and hierarchical systems. Their thinking is based on this hierarchical systems. You're never going to get those people to come together to create this. What's your weight? 172. The airline now is asking passenger what's their weight. Okay. Yeah. So we have to all at some point agree on what endeavors we should undertake that will eventually lead us all into a peaceful coexistence. And then some people in that group, when the peaceful coexistence begins, because you can't really, when war and bombs blowing up and you're always worried about people shooting you in your car and taking your paycheck from you, it's hard to focus. Okay, so when we finally create that world, regardless of what's going on in Mother Nature, we have the ability to create that world. Certain individuals, based on their own path and where they are on that path, will eventually come to these insights. Yeah, golden age, and they have different names for it. I think in the East, different yuga cycles we go through, turning the wheel, right? But you got to remember, in Buddhism, the goal is not to be strapped to the wheel. And I envision a person just strapped to a torture wheel, being spun around and around. In my mind, with arrows coming at the wheel from this automatic arrow shooter that society itself has created, and the will, society also, we have created this will. The human mind created the will. The problem with some of you guys, I'm gonna just say this, is that you have never tasted true mental clarity and bliss through your own efforts. You settle for secondary information in every endeavor, and at some point, if you truly are on the path, you have to dispense with secondary commentaries on reality. You have to get your feet dirty, wet. Okay. You have to go and put your feet on the path and walk down the dark, dark trail yourself. And everybody is doing this dance of, uh, the Shiva Shakti dance, the dance that creates and destroys the universe. Everybody's doing this dance. But the problem with the dance that we're doing here in modern times is this, it's more like a drunken orgy based on just this hedonistic strong desire to alleviate suffering. Okay. And if you really trust your sages and your great teachers that Homo sapiens have we've given rise to certain great teachers through our species. A few, we've been on the planet for X amount of time, and they've come to certain realizations. And these realizations, if you go between Shakyamuni, the Buddha, Jesus Christ, I'm not as familiar with Muhammad, but I'm gonna go on a limb and say, yeah, the same similar insights. The thing is this: I think they all the great teachers, Krishna, would agree on the requirement for peaceful coexistence. Peaceful coexistence has certain requirements. And the last thing that I would say would lead to peaceful coexistence is me aiming 20 nukes at your country when you only got 10 aimed at mine. Okay. Now, that may work for a period of time. Okay. Rhetoric designed to indulge others. Yeah, true that. Because they're not, you have to reach a certain degree of selflessness before these teachings make any sense. Before you can even, a teacher shouldn't even open his or her mouth until a certain period of time when they've gone through certain experiences. And if you look at the ancient way, you know, you had to have gone through certain trials before you were qualified to open your mouth about a teaching. And then the problem in the West, and other places in the world too, is that's not required. Anybody can just say what they want. Freedom of speech. Yeah, freedom of speech is important, but there's also freedom to jump off a fucking ledge. That's implied in those freedoms. I can, if I choose to, even though it's against the law to commit suicide in some places, not every place, but that's humans' right because we have a monk who set himself on fire in the Vietnam War. So you can't say human beings don't have the right to choose life or death at any point. Okay, if you want to go to the, like, what's the most extreme choice you could make? Like, your choice to be or not to be, right? So the structure that we see in society, yeah, the monk that, yes, let himself on fire. But Thich Nhat Hanh talked about this monk, and he said that the monk contemplated this greatly before he did it. And the monk also said that no one was listening to the Vietnamese people. It's similar but different to the way Martin Luther King probably knew he was going to get killed. Okay. Maybe even members of his family. Because, we'd had the church bombings. He wasn't sure if someone was going to strap a bomb into his house. He didn't know. He didn't know. But he still came forward and was the light to clarify what a human being is capable of when they take wisdom and love and use that as the foundation of their approach towards truth. When, when wisdom and love, wisdom and compassion are the foundation, then whatever comes out of that, even though it looks kind of rough at times, and it does look kind of rough at times, because each of us that is not, whatever level of this learning, we misinterpret reality moment to moment. And that is why the practice has to take place in the same time frames that it takes to make the mistakes. The brain can, subconsciously, there's no time limits, but, the conscious brain can't process things faster than around 250 milliseconds, you know. And so if you think about it, these problems that are arriving, they arrive in units of at least 250 milliseconds. The time it takes to come up with one thought compared to the next thought and actually sit and think about it, but much slower than that, probably because it takes you time to think about something, come to a conclusion based on a memory you had from the past, based on the interaction that you had. I appreciate it, Frazier. I think we come here with certain predispositions. I think that karmically, my soul has been on a journey. If you believe in reincarnation or you don't, hey, yeah, filtered by the logical mind before downloaded, or downloaded to the subconscious by the universe, and the filters that aren't necessary of the logical mind are slowly in the process of removing. Because the problem is that we put these filters up, not just of our own doing, but because society helps us build a filter, helps us build a colored lens, which is a filter. A lens is a filter, right? It blocks out certain wavelengths, it reflects them, and lets certain ones through. So a green filter lets everything but green through, right? A lot of people don't realize that. A green lens lets everything but green come through. That's why it looks green. Because when you were a little kid, you added colors together, right? And you made colors. When you add, I forget which ones you add together. You add what so what you see is a combination. Yeah, there's a whole branch called optics, in physics. But the reason I'm taking this time after the reading is to try to clarify, to try to get people to understand the amount of effort and honesty and just a wholehearted approach towards living that is required before you can penetrate these types of teachings. No different than if you want to penetrate the teachings of Jesus. It takes a certain type of preparation and honesty and selflessness before you can honestly penetrate these teachings and then clarify them, because each one of us is a separate point of clarification in this universe. That's the whole miracle of impermanence, the miracle of change in each moment, is that each one of us can be the truth, but it doesn't have to look exactly like it did a second ago to still be the same truth. This is what befuddles the mind of the materialist, because the materialist wants it to look the same way every single time. And when they can freeze it in time, which is impossible because you're looking at it in time. So there's that problem. How do you freeze something in time when you yourself are stuck in this flow of time? You're going to freeze something, so you think. So already we can see your logic is flawed, and then analyze it, come up with the solution based on a static model. There is no static model, man. There's no static model. Thus the need, thank you, for teachings like the one that Rosenberg is going into, to teach people the nature of mind, the nature of consciousness, the nature of how clarity gets muddied up. Instinct, I will say that maybe the universe comes up with certain instinctual ways. Biological organisms come up with instinctual ways. But don't forget this: the human animal is supposed to have one step, one thing that puts us in a better position. Yes, truth is a paradox, is the word I like. Ever changing, but always staying the same. In other words, if I have a box that looks like infinity and I rearrange the elements within that box, ever changing, the elements within that box, each one within themselves cannot exist unless there are a minimal two elements in the box. There could be infinite elements in the box. But the rearrangements of these elements are what we call reality. And we all get confused because we forget that every element in the box requires a different element to define itself. How do you define, 1 foot without 12 inches? You could try, but you're going to go to the British Royal whatever Academy and find that 1 foot that's in some glass frozen box, because you can't have things expanding and contracting with the heat, right? Because then 1 foot gets a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So somewhere in the world, you're going to go borrow that foot every time you want to measure something, right? So every time you measure something with your ruler in every part of the world you're in, you're actually off a little bit. You just don't realize it. The same thing happens with the mind. Every time you think a thought, right? But yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Like every one of these units of measure, the sonometer, the meter, they have some unit somewhere in the world in some frozen sort of configuration that is supposed to be the meter, but it's not, because it's not an absolute zero. It's still expanding and contracting just within limits that we agree upon, but we're being dishonest a little bit. The dishonesty is that we realize that there can be no such thing as the meter, capital T, because everything at a molecular atomic level is always moving, always doing this. Yeah, yeah, that's where we come up with the foot. I still do it. Like if I want to see how long something is, I just step 1, 2, 3. It's about 25 feet, 30 feet. I mean, it gets me in the ballpark. The problem with getting in the ballpark fathoms. Oh yeah, water. We, human beings can come up with an infinite unit of measure if we wanted to. I have a new unit of measure today called the golf ball. How many golf balls does it take to fill up a cup? This cup right here would take about yay number of golf balls. Okay, you're gonna be hella off in your units of volume if you use this as your unit of measure. I'm gonna have so much space in between these balls, right? But if everybody for 100 years agreed to it, this is what would be accepted. With human perception, we have accepted certain things. Huge holes, huge spaces. We try to fill it in with modern science, math, physics, engineering. We still have not come to the point where, yeah, like currency, right? We understand paradoxes, okay? Paradox, polarities, yin and yang, up related to down. When you become a student of paradoxes, I would say you're a student of one of the basic principles of spirituality. The vows saying that the endless desires within me, the desires within me are endless, but I vow to be rid of them all. How can you be rid of something when you just said they're endless? Why would you say something like that? Unless there's another component to reality that the average person does not fathom and will not fathom and cannot fathom with this mode of thinking. So you're trying to get the person to break that mode of thinking for a period of time so they can see something different. Is asking God for science, education, a paradox? I don't think so. I think the paradox understands itself, right? Like that's the whole point of spiritual practice, is to get to a point where you, the paradox, can become one with itself for some period of time to have clarity. And once you have that clarity, the way it plays out is that because you now have this different perspective experientially, not through secondary sources, but experientially, I can tell you myself, entering into Anapanasati uh, meditation is extremely um, edifying, clarifying activity. I can tell you that it is not like my normal waking state of consciousness. I can tell you that it's not like daydreaming. I can tell you that it's not exactly like near death experience, but it's related to all those different things. It is related. So when I talk about not being afraid of what comes after life, it's based on my experiences within this life. I'm having different experiences, not being afraid to step outside of my comfort zones, being okay with saying, eh, this is not the best unit of measure. Even though I can build houses with this, I can get rich, I can get a Bugatti, I can get me some gold grills and shit. I can do a whole lot with this, but this eventually leads to lack because all the space in between is thrown away. And the person over here needs that space. After I put about 20 million of these balls together, and I sacrifice that space in between them and say, we don't care about that. We don't care about that extra space. That extra space, somebody somewhere needs it. The fish in the ocean need it. The insects and the bees out there in the yard need it. Okay? So the human being, by not clarifying his position in this universe, through rigorous mental, spiritual discipline based on love and wisdom, continuously creates this discord, this inequality, because him or herself is not concerned with filling in the spaces. This unit of measure is good enough. Good enough for how long? For who? For what group? You see? For what species? We're not talking about that. We want something that can occupy that can include each group, including the animals, including the microorganisms. Okay, because we need all of these organisms to survive on this planet, and the plants too. We need them. So these types of teachings, when the attempt is to get as close to the truth as we can with words, and to get the student to go and occupy the space, his own space mentally, to see what emptiness really looks like, to see that there is no absolute out here except the absolute. That gets people to become less ego based, uh, gives them the ability to intellectually get themselves into a space where they can utilize compassion to a greater degree, because now they realize that they're always going to be a little bit off if they use just their five senses and their intellectualizations to try to talk about reality. Well, justice is supposed to be blind, but it's always a little bit of that going on when you just use the waking, alert state of consciousness and your intellectualizations and your teachings from your ethnic group to measure everything in the whole universe by that, right? Well, I mean, the whole statement in Buddhism of dependent co-arising is this. This is because some unit within it is also, or 1 foot is 12 inches. So we're sort of satisfied with that as human beings. Well, I just told you it was 12 inches. So now I broke it up into smaller units. But these smaller units are also composed of smaller units and smaller units and smaller units. And they are related to larger units and larger units and larger units. So human beings have to play a trick with themselves, which is to always have this not exactly clarified uh, view of reality mentally, subconsciously. This plays in as we pass this incomplete knowledge on generation to generation. And make no mistake about it. There's no requirement that the subconscious has to be this pure, undistilled, distilled space of purity. The subconscious is composed of elements that have been passed on, that have been inserted into it, What's the point of us going into the subconscious with psychology if it's some pure space? If it's some pure space that's unblemished, we don't need to go into it. It's going to function, autonomously without any mistakes. So the point of clarifying these things is that the future collective consciousness includes this point of clarity, that we can offer to the generations after us and say, look, spend some time with this. Spend some time. Thank you, Fraser, for your gift. I appreciate it. Spend some time with this course of logic, which will require you to get your feet wet. It will require you to put golf balls in glasses and clarify for yourself. Yeah, that ain't the best unit of measure. What is? If you're talking about absolute reality, truth at its in its purest sense. What if we all are right in some sense because we are all entities of the universe expressing our views of it? Who's to say agreed upon module? Oh, yeah, I agree. There is no, yeah, you just restated what we just said. There is no absolute right. Not as long as we talking about it. Not as long as we expressing it. All right. If it can be expressed, there's something about it that is not in and of itself. If it can be expressed, there's something in and of itself that's not an absolute. It is not a self-contained entity. And so you have to look at the dependent core rising and convince yourself that this is the basic expression of reality. Because I'm a student of chemistry and physics, and I've studied the tools that particle physicists use, quantum mechanics, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need a lot of convincing. You see, I've already got the tools to see that all we have is a relative based description of reality that always needs something else to describe it. So once you become convinced of that through your own efforts and through the practices of looking within yourself, then you become more malleable. You become an adept, a student of the craft. What craft? The craft of creating realities. A student of the craft. How does the mind actually work at its most fundamental level? And from there, you can build all these intricate systems up. Quantum mechanics, physics, cosmology. Integral and differential calculus, statistics, which no one actually knows why it works. Okay, by the way, no one knows why the law of averages takes place in the universe. Nobody knows that. If you don't believe me, go look it up for yourself. But understand what you're grappling with here. That when you walk around happy and cozy and fat and warm, you're playing a mental trick with yourself. You are for a brief period of time ignoring the subtle sense of dissatisfaction that we call suffering in Buddhism. Therefore, you don't see the need to use something like the Anapanasati Sutra, breath by breath. The name of the book is Breath by Breath. Okay, we're trying to use reasonable units of time to do the work in. Since we just said that the mind can see around 250 milliseconds between reactions, that's the limits of the human perception. So, breath by breath, it gives you enough time to do some work. That's what I'm saying. Enough time to look within yourself and see, are my perceptions accurate? Or are they based on ego? Are they based on my sense of fear, attraction, and aversion? I need this. I should avoid that. Because that's what instinct really is. It's some process that's been passed down through a biological organism to its progeny that is below the level of perception that happens automatically. But it is also taught. It is also taught. There is no unique thing in this universe. Everything is dependent on something else. So those instincts required something happen. So every time you saw a yellow flower, a lion jumped out. But when you come to America, guess what? There's no lions over here. So how come every time you see a yellow flower, you start shaking and quivering? Your instincts are flawed. You see? Because you lack the understanding of, we call it, my daughter. Well, listen listen to the first part of Rosenberg's discourse. It's a wonderful book. What I tried to add to it was some of the insights from modern medicine, modern psychology, which is my background. But it all comes down to whether or not I think you're working from a place where you have genuine concern, genuine affection, genuine compassion that says, I don't want to be the one to be the source of this suffering for myself or others. So I will learn this science. I will learn this art. I will use the tools that have been handed down to me by my ancestors that allow me to get a clear picture of who and what I really am. Now, as they will tell you, you don't control that. You don't control the mind. Just because you just because you take up that task doesn't mean you're gonna learn to control it. If that's your goal, don't waste your time and go do something else. Go play tennis and come back when you're ready. But if you can be okay with, I can never control. Well, control what? Control what? Everything depends on something else. Therefore, in this level of reality where we have conversations, there's always something lacking before we get to what we call the absolute, ultimate reality. Christ consciousness, nirvana, Buddha nature. But without the knowledge of how this operates, we never know what we lack. And what we lack, we can experience. Okay? We can have an experience with that. But that experience, I'm not going to say it doesn't happen spontaneously, but one path to that experience, the experience of oneness, wholeness, unity, is the utilization of compassion and wisdom, which refines our discernment. Not so many filters, not so many colored filters, right? We try to get the filters out of the way. Just experience this moment as it is. Me being a component of this moment. Okay. The closer we get to that experience, I think the more happiness and joy we have, the less fear we have. We don't have as much fear of life or death. The spontaneity of our joy and our wisdom and how it affects us and those around us, it starts happening, as you would say, instinctually. But to be aware and to be conscious is to say that even my instincts, at some point, I have access to those. I see those and what they're doing, right? And I'm not just a blind slave to reality. I'm not just an automaton of nature. I now have brought online the highest level of my being. And when I bring that level online, um, the true expression, the highest expression of what a human being can be, is expressed in that moment. You know, it's almost like a child playing a game in a way, but the highest level of game that can be played, as far as the expression of an understanding of what reality is, us being a component of reality. As long as we think we're just victims of reality and we have no say so. Now, when I say you don't control the mind, I mean in an absolute sense. I mean as far as you do all this research and you figure out these equations and then go through all this philosophy and psychology, then you get to the point where you're the lord over the kingdom called mind. I don't think it works like that. And the teachers that I've studied in the past from Christianity, Buddhism, philosophy, I think they state a similar thing in a different way. You know, just because you think and you are doesn't mean you control the thinking or the beingness. It's just a realization. That's it, right? I don't think Descartes made that statement as some sort of um, attempt to master reality and be its lord. But I will say that when you look at it from the standpoint of trying to reduce suffering for yourself and people around you, I feel like that's a noble family to belong to. To belong to a family, what's the job of your family? The job of my family is to diminish the suffering of all sentient beings on the planet Earth. Let's just start with Earth, because we can at least care about our immediate family and then earthly family. Extend that wisdom and compassion bit by bit, but it requires that we grow in wisdom, we grow in compassion. How can you extend this thing out when you only have the minutest amount for yourself? So to look at these things and have the insight of our teachers, of the masters, is necessary. It's not just something that's like, oh, do it if you want to. I don't think we will advance the cause of humanity until most human beings have these insights. And then the conversations on caste and money and ethnic group, these will become like trivial, because the conversations will always be centered and grounded in the basic core components of what is our humanity composed of. What is mind? You see, because people who don't have access to that wisdom, they're gonna use something, right? You ain't got access to sugar, so okay, you know, give me something that's not as refined, right? But sugar ain't a good example, because refined sugar would definitely lead to diabetes if you keep eating it every day in mass quantities. It will definitely degenerate your health. But if a person desires to know the nature of reality, these are the tools that have been given to us 2,500 years ago. They have, hopefully, if they're blessed, access to these teachings, and they can at least listen to the teachings. Learning to listen on a deep level is not just the key to financial prosperity. In other words, getting college degrees and all of that. It's also it's necessary before you can understand and get to know yourself. Hey, Mom, don't let her slam the thing down there, because you know she can reach that now. Anyway, you guys be blessed. Uh, get the book, get the audio book, listen to it, read it, contemplate it, sit with it. Don't be the typical Westerner that burns through something in 20, 30 minutes or an hour. I got that. I read that. I seen that movie. You know, how much is stuff do we have? Stuff is not the problem. We got stuff. We got mass quantities, as they used to say in Saturday Night Live. Consume mass quantities. We got mass quantities. What we need at this point in history is clarification, edification, right? And the results will dictate if what's being clarified is really, truth. Because now we have, just an enormous amount of suffering around the planet. Since COVID's resolving, and now we got a war over Israel and Palestine. So it's like it's never ending, man. So each person needs to see the value of wisdom, the value of understanding self. Otherwise, yeah, then you settle for the automaton, you settle for the programming, you settle for somebody else's explanation of what you are. And make no mistake about it, they're more than happy to corral you into some existence, mindless existence, where you just produce for somebody else. If that's not what you want, then you got to put yourself on the path. You got to task yourself for a lifetime with growing, because it actually doesn't stop there either. So I'm gonna stay. Be blessed. Till next time.